Hello, Caroline. Thank you so much for doing this interview for me on intercultural perspectives. Could you give us a little background, who you are and where you're from, what kind of travels you've done, and how many cultures you've met and what you're doing now?
Yes, so I was raised and born in Montreal, Canada. I have been living in Montreal most of my life, even though I have had the privilege to travel. Early on, my first few years of my life were spent in Cameroon, in Africa. Until my father's passing there. Then we went back to Canada, and yeah, most of my primary and high school years were done in Montreal, and then I did my senior year here at Principia in St. Louis. And before that, I just had a few travels. I would say more like touristic travels for warmer weather that we tend to do from Canada, just like a week or so once in a while, and going to summer camp in Maine. Those were my experiences. Until then, on my own, I then got to travel for work and or for pleasure, backpacking mostly. From Morocco, Turkey, South Africa, Cuba, most of Europe. I'm kind of like forgetting a few countries here and there, but yeah, so I was privileged to try different cultures and religions and food, but mostly meeting people. That was the big highlight, just observing and talking with people and just very curious about how others lived. And my fun thing would also always try different groceries or food markets and just try to explore and, get to know more of, the different cultures and food. And yeah. So that pretty sums it up.
Yeah, that's really great because Samantha, who I interviewed, said Canadians are big travelers. They see a lot of the world. And they're very understanding of much geography and much culture.
Yes. First, I think is because our country welcomes is mostly a country of immigration. As the United States is, but very, very open to immigration more because our country is colder. They've been wanting for, many years to populate and just make sure that, we would have enough families to populate the country. So for years, it's been open immigration and so we've seen, through the waves of different world issues and wars and problems, different flows of influx of immigrants. But that's also what's made us so unique and special. And I think Canadians take pride in that, embracing all cultures. And yes, they are big travelers. Curious travelers, I would say. They don't just go for, of course, because we live in the cold, we tend to go down south a little easier because it's cheaper for us. And but we also tend to, like to try different places and cultures. But also, I think for many, many years, I'm not sure it's the same anymore. But for many years, when I was backpacking, I remember that my Canadian flag on my passport or on my backpack was a very useful, I would say, sort of icebreaker or conversation, like almost like a peace, like, a peaceful country that people sort of, were happily, I remember I was in Turkey in a bus one day and this teenager barely spoke any English, and he, as soon as he saw that I had a Canadian flag on my backpack, he asked me about if I knew Bryan Adams, and he started singing a song of Bryan Adams. And he was so excited that he could share that with me. And I just laughed because, you know, Bryan Adams was not one of my favorite singers. But again, I just thought that's amazing, you know, how culture and just music and just makes you dream, because obviously you didn't have the means probably to travel, but just, you know, being able to share that with me, I could tell he was very happy about that. So I just, you know, and that's been the highlight for me. Traveling has always been that, to make those connections with people that, you know, sometimes you do know that they cannot travel, so they ask you a lot of questions. And some other times I've been traveling in places where I was the one that was curious, and I realized that they wanted to share things, but I could tell in their eyes that they could not. So sometimes that's also a little heartbreaking, because you want to have those connections, but you know that they're not free of, you know, they can't speak their truth, or, you know, sometimes share things that, you know. But this said, Canadians around the world, Sam is correct, we do travel, and we are, I think, welcomed. So that's been, I think, what has encouraged mostly Canadians to travel, because we have that sort of good reputation, if I may say so, as a general, you know, global citizens, I guess.
Good global citizens, yes. And it's amazing. One of the things that your counterpart actually spoke about was the fact that in the United States, the understanding of world geography is not as much as Canadians. And I then did some digging and realized only 20% of Americans own passports, you know, so it's not as big a traveling populace as Canada. One of the other things that she had expressed, and I'm not sure if you've had any issues like this, but was because the perception of the world is you're American until we see your flag. And then we realize you're Canadian, you're not American. And one of the things she was saying is her crossing of the border when she got married became increasingly harder, despite the fact America is right here, you know, and the perceptions by a lot of the world is that it's only hard for people from the South, you know, from like crossing from Mexico or from other countries like that. And it was news to me that there were issues there too. Have you had such issues that it becomes a little harder at the American border?
Yes. So two things. The first one, I would say that in compared to Sam, I haven't had that same perception from around the world that I'm part of the United States or the US continent, just because of my French accent.
Yeah.
Wherever I go, people don't think of me as Canadian or American. Until then they realize, oh, Montreal, oh, you're North America. So that takes a little while. So I don't have that same sort of first either apprehension or the first reflex is not to think that I'm, you know, from the American continent. So that's one thing. The second thing is, yes, I agree with Sam regarding the border. Well, I don't know if Sam has explained this to you, but the United States, and I'm sure you've experienced that yourself, but the United States is one of the few countries in the world where their border control is in the how do I say this? Is in the country of the
Is in the
sorry, trying to is in the country that you're leaving. So basically, if I'm in Canada and I go to the airport, I'm not going to be doing border crossing once I land in the United States. They have, and again, I don't know how they managed to do that, but the border crossing is in Canada. So every airport in Canada has a US boarding crossing station. So you're not even able to get on the flight if you did not go through that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is completely the opposite of every other country I've traveled. So, and this said, there's always, so it's kind of weird because you're in your own country, like I'm in Canada and I'll just like be flying to New York, for instance, and just in my city, I'm at the, you know, at the gate, and I get treated as if I had done something wrong, or being questioned as if, and this was prior to 9/11. It's not just after 9/11. 9/11 has not, made it easier. And then with COVID, it's just been a really, really hard situation. Especially when, 2 years ago, I had to try to come and see Stella or pick her up after her school year, and I was not able to do so. So even with legal aid and a letter from a lawyer, and it was just, God sent it that I was able to do such a route. But in the end, I just, took a land crossing, and even the land crossing was not a pleasant situation. It just felt like they were going to put me in jail, kind of a thing. And you're thinking, we're your neighbor, where we have NAFTA and agreements, and we're not even supposed to have passports. We're supposed to have this sort of, so, and even now, I think what's going on is that there's still debate, because Canadians took a very long time to allow US Americans that were not vaccinated in, just because they were making so many efforts in Canada to support our own health system, because our health system is because we have less people, and because we're under like some sort of governmental slash, some people will say we're socialist, but meaning there's a social system so that you don't pay for your health care. And that works well if you're just providing for the people for normal basis. But when there's a crisis going on, like let's say COVID, then they have to make sure that they can supply, right? They can't, so because of that, they've been very cautious, maybe over cautious, but still that was, what they knew at the time. And that created some kind of, I guess, like dynamic with the American immigration boarding situation. And now things have opened up, but it's not completely resolved. And I feel right now, from what I read in the news, that, I think the Americans are still holding on to a few things, like the ones who own Nexus, like the ones that you can cross border just with your eye identification. Some of them are not being renewed, or they're not being, so I don't know, there's something there that, but this said, we're hoping and praying for better neighboring practices, the way that it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. But Sam is correct, things have changed. And I'm not saying it's only on the US side. I think it's, maybe the planet has gone a little more, like I would say protective and defensive. But it's just too bad, because someone even reminded me this week, actually, here on the campus, that they had just gone to Montreal a few weeks ago, and they were surprised how different it has been compared to when they had gone, like, I don't know, 10 or 20 years ago, just with their driver's license, just crossing border with, by car, and just having a wonderful weekend, and just, they would come by, and it was very easy compared to today. So
yeah,
yes,
no, it's a perception from a lot of other countries that there's so many similarities that it's easier between both of you guys, the American Canadian, and it's, in a way, it's nice, or not nice, but it's good for people to see that these are not things that are just color or that kind of prejudice. These are things that are happening to other people too, regardless of,
Yes.
So
yes,
I think it's really
I can testify of that.
Yeah, it's really a good thing. So the understanding of geography and things of that nature, and the worldliness of America. A lot of the interviewees have spoken about the corporate consciousness, the buying and trading being a culture here, versus in some places where the environment and healthy living and community living are more of the practice. Do you find things like that? Oh, don't freeze on me.
The line is cutting. The Zoom is cutting.
Yeah, okay. So you're back now. It's a bit
Yes.
unstable. Yeah. Good. So
Yes,
yes,
you were talking.
about the culture of, is Canada that kind of buying a lot of stuff, and is it very worldly that way, you
Yeah.
think? Brands and
Yes. So yeah, so we have both. We're big consumers. We overconsume electricity because it's something that's very free for us because we have a lot of water plants, all, you know, that we're very privileged to have. We call it the blue gold, like it's something that we know eventually will, you know, so it's yeah, we're over consuming, and you know, but we're not there yet with losing sight of community and um, city centers and neighborhoods, and especially in Quebec. I don't know if it's because it's French Canadian, but I also think Vancouver has that, maybe Toronto as well. But a lot of even the big cities, they do tend to feel more human scale. First of all, because we're, you know, obviously much less people than any other, you know, big American city. But there is a heart and there is a soul, and people really try to gather, not lose track of, you know, being one with another or learning about others or getting together. So COVID was hard in that sense of just, you know, all of a sudden for first time people had to just, you know, spread out and not, you know. So we are consuming a lot, but I think that we're not completely past hope of just still being very human and very, I would say, hoping for closeness, or you know, there's something very, I think people say that all the time about Canadians, but something about the fact that we're like nice, or even sometimes too nice. In many documentaries they make fun of us because, you know, they keep saying we don't lock our doors and we don't expect anyone bad, and for us gun control is the obvious kind of thing, and we're not, you know, we're not in that headspace. So I mean, I'm generalizing big time here because that's what the question is. You know, I don't know for all of Canada, but I do think that there's something still, I would say, really good intent in the heart of the various communities living, but we're not escaping the American, you know, way of consuming. And Canada is a really big partner with China and has always been. So the industrialization, when that happened, and when China took over most of the sales worldwide of all their products, we were for sure like probably the second country or third country after the United States to purchase from them. That are put in, like no use of plastic bags, for instance, at the grocery stores and so forth. They don't have those anymore. But for instance, Walmart, that was in Quebec, had to sort of apply our rules, even though they have not yet applied that rule for the rest of the United States. So it's interesting. So yeah, but we're still very big consumers, and unfortunately, that's something that, you know, it's like a big boat having to slowly start, you know, stirring, and I think it's going to take a while, but I think the Canadian government is wanting to slowly make those impacts and changes towards 2025, if that's even possible, but we're hoping for it.
so tell me, what are some misconceptions does America have about Canada?
First of all, very little people know that we're provinces, that we're not states. Very little people know that not all of our geography is lived on. Besides the First Nations that live in the colder climates, the rest is kind of like very sparse, unless you're, going to the lower, next to the border kind of cities like Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, and Calgary, and all those cities, because it's too harsh. The winters are too harsh north. So people think that the geography is big, but when you look at our numbers and how many people we are, it's very little compared to, So that's why this is a political statement, but that's why sometimes in the past, when I felt like some comments were made, or sometimes people are just complaining about immigration, I'm like, if you're looking at the rest of the planet, we have a duty to allow people to use our land and to, but that's my vision of it. But yes, so we're very fortunate about agriculture and about water. And what people do not know is that we're also feeding and sending a lot of electricity to Eastern New England and New York states, selling our electricity, because we have a lot of water, what's the name for it? Dam, like the
Yes,
ones that
hydro
are
dams.
man-made to control,
Hydro dams.
yes, to control the electricity. So that's one thing. But the biggest, I think, misconception is that I've heard this from Americans, that they think we're socialists just because we have a good, I would say, to my comparison with different countries, I can just say it's a human system when I say that women have, are allowed to take a year off once they have a baby, and the government pays for at least, 60 or 70% of their, normal income, and that they're protected by the law, that they have to go back to the same job they had when they left, and that year can be divided with the spouse if need be. To me, it just feels like a very human thing to do. It doesn't feel like it's socialism. I'm just, that schools are free unless you go to university, and college level, it's something like maybe 2,000 or 3,000 a year, and that's for everybody. And it's just like to pay for the system to be, so everything is very fair, but like in everything, there's a balance. And unfortunately, the system is getting old and has not been updated in many ways, so that it's the educational system, the health system, the railroads, or the transportation system. So they need to input or inject money a lot every year, but they have to make choices throughout, as many governments. So we're not Cuba, which is, really, really socialist and just really imposing a roll of toilet paper and, I don't know, a piece of chicken and grain every week to their people. But, most of them are doctors or notaries, but unfortunately they have to work in, hotel resorts to make more money than they would as, doctors. So that to me seems a missed opportunity for that sort of, the intent is a good idea, but the way that it's practiced, maybe not. In our case, that's why I laugh a little bit when people think we're socialists, because I'm like, not really. I think to me it's like a fair, almost comparable, I would say, to Scandinavian countries. A lot of them use very similar ways of doing it. And that's why a lot of Canadians tend to travel to Scandinavian countries, and the same, there's like a natural sort of, I think Australia has that as well. Like there's a similar mindset in terms of what the government should be. So it's not to put their nose into people's business or bedrooms, controlling things like abortion and things like that. It's more about just giving a fair chance to families to have the basics to make it, and the elderly mostly, because they can't afford. But then the third misconception is that a lot of people have no clue of our geography, no clue that Jacques Cartier and the discovery of basically the continent was where Quebec City and all of that area or region, and that the French came in first, and then the French had so many other issues somewhere else that at some point they figured it was such a hard country to, to conquer because it was so harsh with the cold and just eating potatoes and cabbage and just it's true, and just so many diseases, and they really were depending on the what they called at the time Indians, today First Nations, but I don't think the French really knew what they were getting themselves into, and since they needed more men and to fight different other battles, then they got their people back, and that's when the English decided, hey, we're going to conquer this. So they fought over, and in the end the English won. But a lot of people don't know that we're still a country today that is considered bilingual. So even though the French language is spoken on a daily basis in Quebec, and there are a lot of Franco-Canadians, they call themselves Franco-Canadiens, throughout Canada. They're again very minority. Sorry.
Minority.
Yes, there are minorities in all of the various other cities throughout Canada, but the most concentration really is in Quebec. But a lot of people don't even know this about Canada. So whenever I just, I'll be speaking, let's say with my daughter or with my sister, and people are like, oh, what are you, is this French? I'm like, yes, it is. Oh, you're from France. And every time I have to explain that there are other French countries in the world that speak, Just last week, I was just referring to me maybe, going and traveling to various French countries to talk about print. And when I mentioned Belgium, someone said, they don't speak French in Belgium. And I was like,
Oh, okay.
Oh, where do I start?
Oh my God.
So yes, but I mean, we have to see this as just opportunities to inform people. The same for me. I learn all the time when I speak with people of different cultures, and that's what I like the most. And also I've been in different countries that had very different situations in the past. For instance, when I was in Turkey, I did 1 month, and at the time, Chiller, which was a woman, was the president of Turkey. And at the time, because it has 1 foot in Asia and 1 foot in Europe, it's a very interesting country for that. Literally, when I was inland, like doing, I don't know, hiking, women would be, covered and just, practicing, Islam. And then I'd be going to the beach and women were just wearing no top, like a monokini, because they're like going like the European style, which is the opposite of me, so I was sort of like, so it's very interesting. And then years have gone by and now it's a completely different dynamic, different government, a bit more oppression coming back and all these things. So meaning that even though we do travel, we can only based on our last trip, because everything else changes so much,
Culture
and I find
dynamic.
that interesting. Yeah, it's not because you've been to India or you've been to, I don't know, I've been to Indonesia, for instance, and it's, things have changed so much since 9/11, even for them, or, just even with all the horrible meteorological challenges that they've had from the tsunami and all that stuff. So so it changes the face of a population and of a community, right? It just has an impact on them. So it's not because you've been somewhere that it has changed. It has not changed. But yeah, so French would be the thing that a lot of people have in terms of misconception also with Canadians, and the fact that they all think that we're very, very nice, but not everybody's that nice. And
but there's also the one of the things we hear from Canadians about French Canadians and this beef they have with each other, from the Toronto to Montreal, the English-speaking Canadians, and I was speaking to Jojo, your mom, about how that is embedded in some historical things. Could you give us a brief of where all of that, because that's another misconception of people outside of any country, that they believe once they see somebody from that country, if they're Indian, all Indians are the same, all Canadians are the same and love each other, all Americans are the
Mhm.
same and love each other, but there are cultural differences.
Mhm. So I'll give you a good example is that once a year there's a Quebec holiday to celebrate basically the creation of the Quebec province, as there would be for a state, for instance. And then every year there's the Canada Day, which is July 1st. And then I also celebrate July 4th for the Americans and then July 14th for the French. So all together, but Canada is on July 1st. And what happens is that there's often like a big celebration throughout Canada, but most of it happens or takes place in the capital, which is Ottawa. And it's all televised, right? And to make sure that they represent everyone, well, there's a bunch of, various, performers coming and just representing Canada. And every year I try to watch it. And every year I'm really like, not discouraged, but like always surprised how different every province is. Because of the past and how immigration was done. How, for instance, most of the Polish immigration went to I would say provinces that are more like central. Asian have immigrated more to the west, obviously, and Eastern from Europe. And anyways, therefore, there's that separation. But then besides immigration, what has triggered is that part of history that I was telling you about initially, is that people just think that it was just the English coming to North America and eventually creating the provinces and therefore Canada. But they kind of, like, a lot of people forget that, the French were here first. They just chose to lose that battle and just kind of like leave it to the English. But our license plate in Quebec says "I remember" in French, "Je me souviens," and that kind of means that we were left. It feels like we're like the poor child, in the sense where we were sort of dumped there by our, ancestors, the French. Sort of not, wanting to continue with us. So basically, think of all those boats coming to, conquer here or just come. And later on, there's no going back because they've started lives. And then the French government, leaves you, or the king just says, hey, we're not sending any more boats. Good luck. And then having to fight. So what's happened is that it's created this an urgency to survive as a language, as a culture, with all the songs, the teachings, the schools, the religion, a lot of Catholicism imposed throughout, mostly in Quebec, a lot, I would say, in Canada overall, but at that time that was really one big factor. But also the fact that it's become through the years a constant sort of not wanting to disappear off the map, basically, as a community and as a culture. That was no longer, as I'm sure you've heard from other kind of cultures, but once there's a movement of immigration, you can be claiming that you're French, but you're not, French from France anymore. You're French from somewhere else, that it's, in Congo, or that it's, because eventually, it's a mixture. That's what makes it interesting, and we love that. But what people have to understand is that for Quebec, it's felt like we're such a rich province, like for resources, but as well as the people that live there, by our immigration, but also by our language. So our French language is the thing that we've been fighting the most to keep and protect. And in the 60s, when the Catholic Church sort of, it's like, civil rights movement and a bunch of different things that really like took place in the 60s was everywhere worldwide, I think. But in Quebec, it was really about just saying enough is enough with the Catholic Church. There had been so many abuse of children and just different, horrible things that are, were still happening until recent years. And slowly, that's why the Pope came this year to apologize. I think slowly they're trying to you know, at least recognize some of the horrible things that have been done. But just said that in the 60s, when the Catholic Church started to have less power, women went in the street, and then slowly people started feeling liberated. And that triggered more of, okay, well then, if we're going to sort of take leadership, we're going to make sure that our language is not to die. And that's when slowly they've been saying, we're welcoming all immigration, but we will pass this law, which is called Law 101, which says that anyone, that you're an immigrant or that you're, you know, born and raised initially from the Quebec province, that you have to go to a French school. So usually it's primary school and high school, and then after that you can make your own choice. The reason why they voted that, and they chose to do that, was to make sure that the language would be, you know, continuing, so that we have immigrants from Vietnam or from India or wherever, everybody's welcome, and they can all speak the language in the street or at home, wherever they want it to be, or even watch TV at the language that they like and all that stuff. That's they're not checking on who's doing what at home. But in terms of educating children, they wanted to make sure that all families, and they also even offered French lessons for adults as well, for free. And they were all invited to do, I think it's like a 3-month class once you know, come into the country.
Yeah.
So it's more like, and that triggered a lot of like disagreement with the other provinces. And then slowly also, because we are a province that's very rich economically and very culturally super, like we're the top in Canada. Every time there's like an Oscar win or something, it's always on, you know, the Quebec side. Most of the directors in Hollywood who are making it today, they're not, I mean, some of them are, but most of them are all from Quebec and all that stuff. So culturally, and also energy wise, like, you know, electricity, water and all that stuff, like we're top, and wood and all that stuff. So because we could be autonomous, that's when slowly the idea came in the 70s of a possible separation. And that triggered like, okay, so like the English Canada was like, what, we're a country, no one's gonna leave, and instead of saying we love you, why don't you stay? That's when it triggered things like, you want to leave us, really? And that's when slowly things got a little, you know, hard. This said, I keep reminding a lot of people that we're still blessed, because we've been fighting this for a long time, but there's never been a war within, you know, or a violence like for Ireland versus England, or the Catalans in Spain versus, you know, we're not putting bombs anywhere. We're not, you know, so it's been a very, I would say, harmonious dispute, if I may say so. So we're doing it, and, you know, in our way. So we're very different. I think with time, people, I feel like the English Canadians used to always talk about us like, oh, they're, you know, because we vote more, we're part of the big provinces, right? Like Ontario and British Columbia. So because we tend to have a more powerful vote amongst all provinces, every time we ask for something, we're sort of being like, oh, you Frenchies, you know, just shush and just, you know.
Caroline, thank you so much. We are less than 1 minute, but I couldn't think of a better note to leave on, because that's, I think, one of the biggest takeaways, that who we are can be really rich, and we have to embrace it. The last interviewee was saying that sometimes we're asked to forget who we are and to just go along with the crowd. But I think Canada is one of the best examples, Quebec especially, you know, keeping one's culture, preserving that, can keep our uniqueness, but keep our beautiful love.